Happy Monday. Welcome to this iteration of Charlotte City Council Intergovernmental Relations Committee. My name is Braxton Winston, and I am one of the co-chairs of this committee, and I will let my other co-chair introduce himself, and then we'll go around.
Excellent. Thank you, Co-Chair Winston. This is Co-Chair Tariq Bakari saying a pleasant afternoon to you all in this Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting, and I'll toss it back around to the rest of our colleagues to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Larkin Eggleston, committee member.
Good afternoon, Matt Newton, committee member.
And I think we're waiting on Mr. Phipps to join us. While we do that, why don't we start with staff in the room, and then we will send it over to our guests on our virtual meeting.
Dana Fenton with the City Manager's Office.
Tracy Dodson, City Manager's Office. Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Mr. Fenton, do we have guests joining us online, sir?
Yes, Mr. Winston, we have our crew from Kilpatrick Townsend. If Mr. Freeman could start, you could introduce yourself, Mr. Freeman, and then your other colleagues can introduce themselves as well, please.
Yes, my name is Nelson Freeman. I'm a contract lobbyist on behalf of the City of Charlotte. I live and reside in Raleigh, North Carolina. Amanda?
Good afternoon, Amanda Donovan with Kilpatrick Townsend, also contract lobbyist on behalf of the City of Charlotte.
John Easterling, contract lobbyist with Kilpatrick Townsend, also on behalf of the City of Charlotte.
It looks like we got
You see Councilmember Phipps has joined us as well. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, sir.
Yes, Greg Phipps, representing the City of Charlotte at large.
All right, we have two main items on the agenda, our state legislative update as well as our federal update, and then we'll have some time for committee discussion and some upcoming opportunities. So unless my co-chair has anything else before, Mr. Fenton, I think you can take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Thank you, Mr. Bakari, and welcome committee members to the meeting today. I'd like to take you through a state legislative update. Next slide, please. And before I get going, let's just say that this has been a very, very unique year for the General Assembly with the pandemic. There was a lot of work to do at the beginning of the session related to COVID-related legislation. As you all recall, back in December, the U.S. Congress passed its Appropriations Act plus another emergency relief measure. And they spent a lot of time in the first part, probably the first month and a half, starting in around February, enacting some policies related to that federal legislation. They also had to appropriate funds, federal funds for economic recovery, K-12 education, and a variety of other things. And of course, with the American Rescue Plan being passed in March by the U.S. Congress, there's probably going to be another COVID-related measure coming up at some point in the near future. Also, since they have done the COVID relief legislation, the bill filing deadlines were still there for members to introduce legislation. The bill filing deadlines have passed in the Senate, and there are still a couple of deadlines before us in the House of Representatives. You have 2 deadlines left for public bills. Not appropriations or finance measures have to be filed by May 4th, and then your appropriations or finance measures must be introduced by May 11th. Next slide, please. I think there's another slide there before this one. No, there isn't. I'm sorry, staff. I'm incorrect in that. Let me share with you some of the issues that we're watching. I'll also get into some of our requests that are emanating from the passed by the General Assembly. But the governor had always indicated some interest in doing a statewide bond referendum. And the amounts they were looking at were between $2.5 and $3 billion. And that, of course, would be money be expended over a number of years for things like capital improvements for K-12 education, university, community colleges, parks and recreation, et cetera. The governor did propose a bond earlier this year when he released his budget recommendations of around $5 billion to take place later this year. However, we understand that the Senate is taking a look at using cash balances in lieu of a statewide referendum. The reason, the state general fund revenue forecasts have shown quite a bit of additional cash, or much more cash than was anticipated to be collected. And there will be another general fund revenue forecast coming before us in the next month, month and a half, which will give a better picture as to where that stands. Another issue that you've been talking about locally and it's gotten a lot of attention in the press is the municipal election schedule. And because of the delay in receiving census data from the 2020 census, it's going to put a crimp on the city as it tries to redistrict its city council districts. And this situation is being faced by approximately 40 other cities around the state. And locally, it's also affecting the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system because they have district elections as well. We're working in tandem with the League of Municipalities. They're having discussions with House and Senate leadership on this issue, specifically the chairs of the election committees in those 2 chambers, along with their staffs, to discuss through this issue. And I think probably it's a fair thing to say that the House and Senate staff and election chairs understand the gravity of the issue, which is the first thing you always need to accomplish in something like this. So more to come on this one in the coming weeks. There's another piece of legislation, or actually an actual piece of legislation I would just like to bring up with you. This is one that has also gotten a lot of attention in the media lately. And this is the increased housing opportunities legislation. There's both House and Senate legislation introduced, and this is legislation requested by the North Carolina Association of Home Builders. Well, there's a part of the bill that mandates the middle housing types in areas zoned for residential use, including detached single-family dwellings, In a lot of ways, it mirrors what's in the draft comprehensive plan proposal that's before the City Council right now. And this is an issue, this part of the bill is getting a lot of attention around the state. And there are folks who support it, like, of course, the Home Builders Association, but also the larger national home builders, understand, are the ones who are really in favor of this part of the bill. At the same time, we'll share with you that there is opposition growing to that part of the bill around the state. I know of at least one town that has passed a resolution opposing it, and I understand, too, that the Central Carolina Council of Governments has also passed a resolution opposing that part of the bill as well.
Do you know what town or city?
It was the town of Boone, and I know that there are some other cities that are considering it at this time. So I just wanted to bring you up to date on that, just to make sure you all know where that stands. And then the City of Charlotte request, when you all adopted, when the City Council adopted its legislative agenda this year, you had several requests in there. The first one has to do with the Charlotte Firefighters Retirement System. As you all may recall, is that this is the legislation that would, actually getting ahead of myself here, what you requested is the authority to raise the amount of funding you're putting into the retirement systems to make sure that it's a financially secure system. That legislation was filed in the Senate, and all 5 of our senators have signed on to it. We do have, we'll be working with Senator Marcus, the lead primary sponsor. She will be talking with the Senate, Senator Raven, who is the Senate Rules Chair, about having this heard in committee. So more to come on that. The subpoena power bill for the, or bills for the Charlotte Citizens Review Board, we have just a repeat of the last couple sessions. We do have local bills filed in both the House and Senate, but we also have something new. We have a statewide bill that was introduced by a senator from Fayetteville that would do 2 things, not just grant subpoena power to citizen review boards, but it would also allow all cities in the state to form citizen review boards. And also, more importantly, you can always form a board, but it also allows the personnel files to be shared with the Citizens Review Board. In some cases, like, for example, the City of Charlotte, about 20 some odd years ago, we had to get local legislation to allow us to provide that information to our board. In the area of the digital divide, this is an area that has really crept up this year because of what's happened in the past year with the pandemic and the need for people to be able to reach out via digital means. There are 2 pieces of legislation that we're looking at potentially as that might be helpful in terms of allowing or bringing more broadband affordability to lower income people. Senator Newton is the Senate Finance Chair. He has introduced legislation on this topic and some other things as well. And then from Senator Deviere of the Fayetteville area, he does have a digital equity bill in that would set up a program to provide that assistance. And then finally, the North Carolina Airport Improvement Program. This is a budgetary issue. It has to do with the funding that the Charlotte Douglas International Airport receives from the state every year to help out with capital improvements in debt service. We have received, or the program went into place a couple of years ago, and we were concerned that maybe that with the financial troubles at NCDOT that it could be cut back. And as of right now, we don't have any news to report either way on this one. We do expect the first budget proposal to be out sometime in mid to late May. Next slide, please. And then looking ahead, the committee next meets on May 17th, which is the 3rd Monday of May. A couple other things to be watching out for. the next 30 days, 40 days or so, is crossover. This is the date that legislation that doesn't address appropriations or finance matters must be out of its house of origin, or the bill can't move forward in this two-year session. And that date is May 13th. We're also looking forward to the State General Fund Consensus Revenue Forecast. This typically is released at some point after the tax filing deadlines, when folks are paying, or actually not just folks, but also corporations are paying their income taxes. And then finally, as I said before, we're expecting a state budget bill to be released in mid-May, and we would expect probably about 30 days after that for the bill to be passed by the General Assembly and sent to the governor for his approval. And some of you all may think, get back to what happened 2 years ago when a budget actually wasn't passed, and certainly has seen more tendency this year to try to reach agreement on this, as opposed to having what we had to go through 2 years ago happen again. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for this report. I'd be glad to stand for any questions from the committee.
I have a question, I guess for Mr. Fenton and or our lobbyists, as it relates to the municipal election schedule. A concern that I have is that the legislature has given us local control to remedy this issue. This is something that they have considered in the past, i.e. the delay of census data and not allowing for our elections to conform to state law. They have given us that remedy. In this case, Charlotte City Council has not taken action in lieu of the possibility of some corrective legislation statewide. The concern that I have there is when we relinquish local control, that we are putting potentially unintentional other considerations on the table. So as these discussions have been happening up in Raleigh or throughout the state, are there any, what is being put on the table? This seems like it should be a pretty straight up fix, but it hasn't been done in months. So that tells me that there are negotiations happening. What are those negotiations looking like, and what is on the horizon for us so that we don't get caught by surprise?
Mr. Winston, I think you really have two questions in there. One is the legislation that was passed 30 years ago that allows cities to push back their elections in the case of something like this when the data is not available so you can redistrict in a timely manner. Since we last met, and I know that the city attorney and his staff briefed the council on this in early March, I believe, on that first week in March at a strategy session. What I've come to learn is that there's been a change in the opinion as to whether that law applies in the instance that we're in right now. There is a consensus across the board from the University of North Carolina School of Government to legislative staff and to others that only applies once the data is in hand from the Census Bureau, and that a determination is made then that the election must be delayed. I'd be glad to get you a copy of what the School of Government put out on that. Certainly there are differences of opinion as to whether that actually is the correct interpretation or not, but that seems to be the prevailing opinion at this time. So absent the data in hand, what we do know is that the Census Bureau has told everybody that it's not going to be out until at least a certain date, which is well after the filing deadlines. So that's the first part of it. So it looks like we don't have the local control on it that initially people thought was in hand. In terms of the other question as to what's being discussed, what's been discussed so far, again, I think what we talked about this at one point is that the House and the Senate were trying to get their arms around this issue in terms of the census data. They have their own districts, the House and Senate districts, for the General Assembly to be redistricted. Plus, they have congressional redistricting to take care of as well. So they were trying to get their arms around this issue. And they also had some other business with the State Board of Elections to try to get through as well. That was discussed quite a bit in the press as well. And so what they've come to the understanding now is that, yes, they have to do something, but they haven't actually gotten down to the point of this is a specific proposal, and that this is what, there's no, in terms of what I know, there is nothing going back and forth between the league and the leadership on this at this point.
I'll just say, full disclosure, in conversations that I've had with members of our delegation, the first part of that answer that you gave was not what they agreed about. That they said that this is a local control issue, and that in conversations that they have had with the Republican chair of the committee that handles this, that was his interpretation as well. So I don't know exactly where we're at. Again, I don't know, again, if our lobbyists are hearing anything different, but what I'm hearing from Mr. Fenton and what I'm hearing from my conversations with our delegation are two different things.
Yeah, I would say basically is that the information I've come into has really been available over the past month or so, and that there probably needs to be some more communication with the delegation on this.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair.
You got it, Mr. Bokhari.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Raleigh the week before last, and I had a couple conversations on this. I think it is on everyone's radar now at the right level. And I think that couldn't have been said several months ago, but now I think it is at the right level. So that's one good box checked. I think there is a pretty good consensus by everyone that goes a little bit against what we heard from the state elections chair and some comments she had made a while back that say the roughly 500 or so municipalities that are not impacted by the census data because they are not districted. I think there's a general consensus I'm hearing. Again, I'm just telling you what I interpreted from the conversations, that is something that they are not considering delaying or making any kind of statement on. That could change, but that's basically what I've heard there. I think the real question that's left is the 40 plus municipalities that are districted, of which Charlotte is one. Is that a decision that they will make holistically across the board there and weigh in on or not? And based on what I've heard so far, it seems like they are going to weigh in. It's just a question of them getting a lot of data points and things they're looking for. So I think unless our lobbyists have any other guidance for us at this point, I think continuing to dialogue with them and ensuring that it stays on their radar is probably our best course of action, just given the uncertainty of, what each of the 40 plus municipalities and our actual authority is, and not so as not also not to get in a conflict with them as they are trying to figure it out. And I would ask our lobbyists if they have a different take on it right now, but that's definitely the one I got after speaking with leadership in Raleigh the other day.
This is Nelson. The only thing I would, echo, not to contribute, but to echo, is that the information that is being transferred between legislative attorneys and the various city attorneys for the universe of affected jurisdictions is closer to 13 or 14 jurisdictions that may have need special consideration to achieve elections in a timely manner. And so I think that the conversation on this is actually finally, as you've said, at the very highest levels to figure out what a very succinct and well agreed upon decision looks like. And so I would just tell us to exercise a little bit of patience. I know it's a little bit difficult, but I firmly believe that we'll have some answers in the next 30 days.
Thank you. Does any other committee members have questions about the state legislative agenda? Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I was wondering, the two bills that deal with increased housing opportunities, Mr. Fenton indicated that they were they were gaining considerable interest statewide. Where do they stand now? I mean, I know they've passed the first reading, but almost all legislation does that, right? Pass the first reading. So where are we going with it? I mean, how is it looking right now?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Phipps. The legislation itself has not yet been heard in committee. And the crossover date is May 13th, which is only about 3.5 weeks from now. So I would expect a committee hearing to be scheduled for this in the next few weeks.
Oh, okay, good.
So it hasn't. Yeah, let me just also say that it hasn't gone through either House or not. Sorry about this. We had a technical issue here. Neither bill has gone through its initial chamber as of yet. They're still in the same stance as they were when they were introduced.
Okay. And as far as the subpoena power bill, are there any Republican co-sponsors on those bills?
Mr. Phipps, neither bill has any Republican co-sponsors.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Mr. Fenton, I know I sent you an email, Mr. Bakari, about a piece of legislation. Would it be appropriate to talk about that at this time, since it's not on our legislative agenda, just a general update? Or?
Well, certainly, yeah, I would be glad to do that, Mr. Winston. The legislation that you brought to my attention is it's House Bill 234. It's been introduced by Representative John Torbett of Gaston County. This has to do with the destruction of firearms when the firearm is used in an assault on a law enforcement officer or any other offense that results in serious bodily injury or death to the victim. And this is legislation that would carve a very narrow exception to the law that doesn't allow, in many cases, for firearms to be destroyed. These are firearms that are seized by police departments around the state, like CMPD. And what we're going to do, when I responded to your email this morning, we're going to be taking a closer look at this, trying to find out why it was introduced, and who actually requested, I think, is also key as well. Not just the legislator, but who came to that legislator to ask him to introduce the measure. It does have, Mr. Torbett is, of course, a Republican, and there are a couple co-sponsors. Some are Democrats, so there is another Republican co-sponsor. So we're going to take a look at that and hopefully get back to you before the end of this week.
Thank you. I'll just give a little more context to the folks listening at home. Under North Carolina state law, police departments, courts, sheriffs, they are not permitted to destroy weapons that have been involved in crimes. They are required to be eventually sold back to the market at market rate. So, for instance, a murder weapon, a firearm used in a murder, cannot be destroyed after that case is adjudicated. Both myself and Chief Jennings believe that is a bad law. We cannot see CMPD selling murder weapons back to the open market. But that's not something that we can do on our own through a policy standpoint. That's something that needs a legislative fix. And we would like to find ways to fix that legislatively. This bill that Mr. Torbett has introduced does not do that wholeheartedly, but I think it provides an avenue that we can probably potentially broach this idea. It does have support of the North Carolina Police Chiefs Association. So anytime that me and the police chiefs can find common ground on an issue, I think that's a good thing. So I'd like for us to dive a little deeper and learn about how we might be able to get some support behind this effort.
Thank you.
With that, I think if we can move on to the next topic, if nobody else has any questions, comments, or concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. The next presentation is to do a legislative update for the federal sector, just like we did for the state. Next slide, please. Earlier this year, the city, or actually late last year, the City Council adopted its 2021 federal legislative agenda with 3 major priorities in there. The first one had to do with transportation and infrastructure, and what we're looking for here, what we've been looking for several years, is an infusion of federal resources into various forms of infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, ports, airports, you name it, climate crisis, broadband access, housing, things like that. And legislation was introduced just last month. President Biden requested legislation, and it has been introduced in the House, I believe. And however, there's a part of it there. How do you fund a plan like this? It's a $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan. The money would be expended over 8 years. And again, the question is, how do you pay for it? And the president has suggested, I use the word suggest, a corporate tax hike over 15 years. I think it would raise the corporate tax from 21 to 28%. And that's already receiving some pushback, of course, including from some Democratic members of the Congress. It is an ambitious plan. It's likely to change. And again, as this third bullet says, as you meet resistance, you have basically need to negotiate these things. You have to compromise at some point. But the House leadership is looking to try to pass this package by July 4th. However, it's probably going to slip into the late summer, early fall. There's a lot of things here that have to be done to get it ready for passage. And one thing the Congress is looking at right now is, just what are the mechanics of passing it? The emergency relief measure that passed last month was passed using the budget reconciliation process, which is an expedited way of getting legislation passed and getting around the Senate rules that have to do with filibusters and things like that. Now, the question now is, will they use that same process or will they use the traditional process? And certainly, if you use the traditional process, it's going to be a lot more difficult. But if they choose to use budget reconciliation, it could go quicker. However, there's some other considerations they have to take into account, and so a decision, as I understand at this time, has not been made as to actually how to get that legislation moving. So more to come on this for sure. Next slide, please. You also had a position on comprehensive immigration reform in there. You've had this in there for a couple of years now, and there seems to be some movement on immigration-related issues. The House has passed a couple of immigration measures already, and then the president has put out their legislation that's been filed, the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 that proposes a path to citizenship for about 11 million undocumented immigrants. We'll have to see how this goes. We've had a lot of false alarms in the past years about whether legislation of this type could be enacted or not. So we'll have to see how this develops going forward. And finally, COVID-19 guidelines for airports. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention did issue the mask-wearing order in airports, which was a very good move to help protect workers in airports from the coronavirus. And as we learn of any other measures that they take or that the federal government takes, we'll let the committee know. And also, I just want to say this. Last month, the city council, mayor and council, met with with our delegation, our congressional delegation. And I know that Mr. Bakari and Mr. Winston did a great job in guiding the council for those meetings. So, and next slide, please. And one of the things that was brought up at least one of the meetings I know was the potential for accessing federal funding through a process that was formerly known as earmarking. Earmarking was something that had been done for many, many years by the U.S. Congress, but in 2011 the practice was stopped because of some allegations of corruption and things like that. That was about 10 years ago now that it was stopped, but the U.S. House is bringing it back on a limited basis this year. And also the Senate is looking at it as well. The Senate Democrats have approved moving forward, but the Senate Republicans have not come out with a proposal or with their response to that. Both House Democrats and House Republicans have voted in favor of it. So anyway, so there is some potential funding out there, another source to get some things that really needed here in the community funded. One of the opportunities out there is to expand the Cure Violence program that the council has started. This is an issue that you all took up last year, I believe, early part of the year, and trying to take a look at some priority areas in the city. In fact, you do have a procurement process currently underway for the Beatties Ford Road corridor. And there's an opportunity here to expand that to two of the other corridors, the Nations Ford Road and Arrowwood Road area, and also the Central Avenue and North Sharon Amity Road area. So just want to make sure you're all aware of that. There's also three other potentialities here too, is that as part of the Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, the Committee on House Transportation and Infrastructure has allowed members to put some proposals in. We have three here that were submitted. These were done fairly quickly in order to meet the deadlines. Battery electric buses, which is something that the City Council has been very supportive of over the last several years. And this is something that we could use maybe for about 10 buses. It's actually, these buses do cost quite a bit more than the regular diesel buses that we're using. And they're probably about $1.1 million per bus. And then also a couple other issues, street lighting. We do have a deficit of street lighting here in the city, but especially along our high injury network, where we have a lot more crashes, a lot more fatalities happening. So we did put a proposal in for some street lighting along that network. And then shared use path in the University City area. As everybody knows, the University City area is growing leaps and bounds, but we also have the issue of access to the area for folks to get there not using their cars. And there's a proposal that's been put forward on a shared use path between University City and a community of color that is located on the other side of I-85. I-85 serves as a barrier to people trying to get from one place to another. So we identified that as an opportunity. So, Mr. Chairman, those are just a few things. There's a whole lot of limitations in the funding that you can seek through this process. Having worked for a local government that was very active in the previous earmarking process, I can tell you right now this is much more limited than what could be expected 10, 15 years ago. With that, Mr. Chairman, that completes my presentation. I'd be glad to take any questions from members of the committee.
Do we have any questions from the committee? Beth Farrell. No, that looks great. I think, I guess my question would be, I know you said that there was a timeline. Are these potential earmark requests going to be something that we discuss as a full council? Does this need a committee head nod or anything like that?
Yes, probably, I don't think we need to. Sure, what happens with them, of course. Maybe just a head nod would probably be fine if you wanted to do something like that. But we're not at this point. For this year, we're going to have to put in a process, Mr. Chairman, going forward in future years where we identify these opportunities before submitting them. Going into this year, we did not expect there to be an earmark process. So we had a very limited time frame to get these in.
Absolutely, and while I definitely I appreciate the 4 items that were submitted, I think we also should acknowledge that the Congressional District 12 encompasses more than Charlotte. So there is the possibility, if we can have an intergovernmental approach, that might be serve better or best for our community at large. For example, I plan on personally, as myself as a council member, signing a letter that will be sent to Congresswoman Adams in support of the community's effort around the Umbrella Center or the Family Justice Center. And that is something that has support from our district attorney. It's something I will share with the rest of the committee members if you are so interested. But I know that there are efforts throughout our community between the county, the district attorney, folks in the courts, and within our own organization. So I hope that we can take, I think this is a little different than our specific legislative agenda requests, since it is such, as you mentioned, such a limited source of resources. And like I said, I would be happy to share that letter with the rest of my committee members for their own considerations.
Mr. Chairman, I totally agree with you on the intergovernmental approach. Because if we put this into a process, more time, we should be doing those things, getting letters of support, making sure all the stakeholders are on board with it. That's whether it's a city project or a county project that we may be participating in together. So I completely agree with you on that. Even the towns, there may be some opportunities there in the future with the towns.
Yes, I mean, again, one of the with this umbrella sign, that is one of the cruxes of the question, is that it can't be a Charlotte-centric thing, that we have to include the towns, include the county, include the district attorney. So I think, again, this is something that Mr. Bakari and I have really tried to work hard on, is to figure out how to have this intergovernmental approach to our spending and policy development. With that said, so I think Mr. Fenton just completed item number 3, which opens us up to item number 4, which is our general committee conversation. If there's anybody that has anything else for the good of the order, speak now. Mr. Bakari?
Nothing for me. I think we had some good chats. I think probably the big takeaway, other than monitoring what's going on, is given all of the large legislation and spending that will be occurring, to the points you've just made, that we have a bit more of a formal monitoring and advocacy / engagement process, so that we can take advantage of those and be up to date. Other than that, I think it was a good update, a good session. Again, this is, for those watching, this is that time of year where we're watching all the work that we do from the other part of the time of year where we're crafting our agendas and throwing them out there. So it's a little more updatey in nature, but that's the nature of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee.
With that said, Mr. Fenton, do we have any upcoming opportunities to collaborate intergovernmentally on anything observation-wise or crafting-wise?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any to bring up with you at this point.
Okay, with that said, our next committee meeting is Monday, May 17th, and if there is nothing else, can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Mr. Eggleston?
Aye.
Mr. Newton? Mr. Phipps? Mr. Bakari?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, committee.